Hello, and welcome back to As Far as Anyone Knows, a podcast about Latino history. I'm your host, Minerva Angeles.
And I'm your co-host, Fredo B.
And we're here to tell you some stories. Today, I will be kicking off our fun plan for the month. As you may know, it is Black History Month here in the United States. And as proper amateur historians, it's our duty to make sure we hit you with some Afro-Latinos this month. And we'll be always talking about Afro-Latinos, but, it's important to take the time and focus on it because there's a reason why we've had to identify a month out of the calendar year to focus on a group of people. I think it's really important to understand, this is like my disclaimer, I think it's important to understand that Black History Month is January 1st through December 31st. I have a friend who tells me that all the time, and it makes me laugh, but it is true. But it's really important to look back and honor and respect the contributions of all Black people globally. And for us, that looks like talking about Afro-Latinos. So I'm really excited to talk to you about somebody very special today. And before we get into that person, Fredo, what do you want to talk about?
So I've been watching a show on Disney Plus called WandaVision. Have you heard of it?
Mostly because you've been watching it.
Yeah. What do you know about it?
It's a woman named Wanda.
Yeah, very good.
And she is like married to some guy who looks like a cheap Iron Man. And they like have twins or something.
Hey, no spoilers. Come on.
But isn't this connected to like a comic book or something?
It is.
Okay, so then I can't possibly be giving a spoiler.
You could, because people don't read comic books.
Well, I don't
but
read comic
watch
books.
movies and TV.
I'm not watching WandaVision, and I don't read comic books, and I know she has twins that are superheroes or something.
Because you watched, you were in the background while I was watching a show. But, whatever.
Well, I mean, it's fine. I'm sure everybody's fine. Also,
Regardless.
if I gave you a spoiler, my bad. Anyway, yeah. So
Yeah, please hit up
show.
Minerva about how angry you are about the spoilers on WandaVision. But, so I bring that show up because it's one of my new I'm a little obsessed with the show because it's just weird. That's the best way, in the best possible way, though. Like, I like kind of figuring out, it's a puzzle box show, so like kind of figuring out what's happening and what's going to happen week to week. But there in the internets, people are not happy with the way the Disney Plus is rolling out their show on a week to week basis. I think we've gotten used to the Netflix model of just, here's a whole season, binge watch this show. And for me, I did get used to that. I know there was a couple shows there that I was like, do I really have to wait a whole week for this? Come on, just give me the whole season. But I'm enjoying this week to week for this particular show because it kind of gives us time to like process and really look at deep dive and talk about what everything is that could be happening. But my question to you is, what do you prefer? Do you still like watching something, waiting a whole week to watch a show, or do you still like the binging? You need the whole season.
Mm-hmm. I think it depends on what we're watching. I would probably say I like both, because there is something to be said about being able to like kind of go through the episodes and find out what happens next. We do live in a society that doesn't have great ability to wait or have a lot of patience because of like how technology has moved so much so quickly. So I would say that binging is fun for those reasons, but I will say there is, as a fan, depending on the show, for example, a show like Handmaid's Tale that does that, or like a good old-fashioned Game of Thrones, there's something to be said about that anticipation of you waiting for the next week to roll around, and you're talking about it with other people. You're going through the motions of trying to predict what's next. And I love those YouTube videos that look for the Easter eggs and try to like decrypt the next episode or that current episode so that you can get clues for what's going to happen in later that season or the next season. And I think I want to give a lot of credit to the time and patience that it takes for like a lot of these showrunners to meticulously plan out these plots that are super intricate and do have Easter eggs and stuff like that like ingrained in them.
Yeah, it's I mean, for some shows it makes sense to drop them weekly just because like you just mentioned The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu. I remember when that first came out, we were like, what is this? Why am I waiting a whole other week for another episode? Because we were so used to Netflix at that point, right? But I think a show like that, which is so depressing and so heavy, is like, you know what? Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't need... Imagine the trauma we would go through if we watched the whole 12 episodes for a season or something like that. Because we would just sit there and be like, okay, well...
Yeah, no, there have been episodes of Handmaid's Tale that the anxiety at the end of the episode is so intense for me that there are times where I'm like, I don't know if I'll be ready next week to find out like what happens.
Yeah,
they do such a good job on that show.
And I think with Game of Thrones, I think you're right that it was... See, I go back and forth with Game of Thrones because I did enjoy the ability to watch an episode, then go to work and talk about it with coworkers who were also into it, trying to make connections to things that happened in seasons or episodes prior. But at the same time, I think it was also one of those things I think that it could have kind of dropped altogether. I would have watched the whole thing, similar to like Stranger Things on Netflix, where everybody kind of watched it. But the problem with binging or just dropping a whole season is that if you're like us, where we're just like constantly either working or parenting, watching Cocomelon, then we might miss the boat on certain things. Mm-hmm. Like a recent example would be for me and then for this house is Tiger King. We watched maybe like we were able to get through like maybe 2 episodes of it, and then that's it. Like, you know, the rest of the world kind of moved on from Tiger King, and we were like, oh, okay, I guess I don't have to watch it anymore. So we kind of stopped at episode 2, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a relief, though. You know, I don't like miss not finishing Tiger King. You know what I mean? It's not like something.
Yeah, but
I felt like
you sort of like. So that's the thing with like binging a TV show. You sort of like miss the zeitgeist, right? You're either in the moment or you're not. And it's a little difficult for people who are constantly working, or just really busy, that to be able to sit down and watch a whole show. Somehow we were able to watch Bridgerton in a week.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that happened.
It was the break, and we had like time off from work.
Okay.
So we were just, our schedule made it work.
So yeah, we watched Bridgerton. So it does depend. But I still see a lot of people angry about it. About like, hey, I need this. Why aren't you dropping the whole season? And I think there's good and bad in all of it. But I'm enjoying WandaVision. And I think you would enjoy it too. It has a little Twilight Zone vibe to it, but with superheroes.
Right. Well, that's where I get kind of like a little thrown off. But there was a scene that I happened to like
look up
there for. And I think I told you it reminded me of a Twilight Zone episode, and you know how much I love the Twilight Zone. So I was like, I wonder if like the people who wrote it were inspired by that scene or that plot in that Twilight Zone episode, because you know
which episode? I'm curious.
The one where the little boy wishes everybody into the cornfield.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, who doesn't want to be able to do that?
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to wish people into the cornfield?
That's interesting.
There's a few people I would wish into the cornfield.
I think that's a testament to how much TV raised us. Where you were able to pick up on a reference like that just by like a very quick scene.
Mm-hmm.
or just how old we are.
We're
No.
old. Listen, there have been times where my oldness is really coming to light in a lot of ways. And I talked about this like last week when I talked about how, my diet has to change. But, well, we're both on Clubhouse now. If you guys want to follow us on Clubhouse, our handles, I think, are the same as they are on Twitter. And yeah, there are some times it depends on the room I'm in that I think there was a question. We were just going around like chit chatting, and somebody said it was somebody's birthday, and the question was, "What's your most memorable birthday gift?" And I said that when I was 5, I got a water baby, and that was a really big deal at the time. That resonated with exactly no one. Like no one was able to give a whoop whoop to the water baby, and then I had to explain what a water baby was, and then it just like kind of lost its significance because I had to be like, it's a baby that like you put water in, and then it kind of feels a little bit like a wiggly squishy baby,
squishy.
and then it's fun. And everybody was like, that seems weird, woman. And then I was like, whatever, it was a really cool gift, so thanks everyone.
Thanks for the validation.
I'm gonna go hide somewhere and cry.
But yeah, so I mean, all that to say that I guess check out WandaVision. Not that Disney Plus needs my advertisement, but Disney Plus, if you also want to pay me to advertise this show, I will take the money. Yeah. But yeah, if you're into superheroes and you're definitely into Marvel, I think definitely check out WandaVision. It is weird, but I think stick with it because it's going some weird places. Okay, Minerva, what do you got for us today? What are we talking about?
I am very excited to share with you the story of Sara Gomez. She was
Sara, like Sarah, but like
Sara.
Okay.
Yeah. Sara Gomez.
No. We're not gonna do that English.
Sara Gomez was born on November 8th, 1942, and she was a Cuban filmmaker. So she was actually popularly known as Sarita. We will be referring to her as Sarita for the remainder of this story. And she was raised in the Havana neighborhood in Cuba, obviously, of Guanabacoa. And this is known as an Afro-Cuban popular culture hub. And she was raised by her paternal grandmother and 4 aunts. And she was considered to be middle class. She was referred to as a leader in her community. She often brought books to her younger family members based on their interests and encouraged them to move forward and pursue education. She was seen as someone who was good at pointing out facts and identifying solutions. So at one point when she was younger, it became clear that she was interested in film. And she had worked in movie theaters and wrote film reviews. One of the main sources I'm using today is actually a documentary that was made about her life. And it was made in her memory because she died very young. And she was the first Black woman in Cuba to have been a part of the ICAIC, which I'll explain in a second. There were times where people had reflected on her dedication to film, and she had like really terrible asthma, like violently threatening asthma. People would say that, she'd go into the river and she'd have the water would be up to her knees, and she'd still, kind of courageously get through that to make sure she shot a scene the way that she thought that it would be best to shoot it. Her asthma apparently was so bad that she was set off by detergents, sprays, or even like emotional moments. If she was really overwhelmed or something, or in a heated discussion or something like that, it might set off her asthma. So she was definitely one of those cases of asthma that was life-threatening. She explored journalism by writing for the youth magazine Melia and for the Communist Party newspaper Noticias de Hoy, or News of Today, before taking a position in the newly formed Instituto Cubano del Arte y Industria Cinematográficos. Cinematográficos. That's what it is. It took a minute. I may edit out how many times I said that wrong. So I'll be referring to it as the ICAIC moving forward. One of the things that I found most inspiring in watching her documentary is there were actually scenes of her having discussions with her colleagues while they were at work. And I was really inspired by sort of this off scene while one of the actors, I guess they were like on break, and somebody had like just caught them talking. And he was also black, another Afro-Cubano. And he was just talking about his frustration in the opera world. So he was an opera artist. He was not getting parts. And his communication was that he felt that the filmmakers and maybe even other actors were not interested in working with him. He kind of like danced around the subject as she kind of like tried to pull information from him. She was trying to understand, like, what is it that you think the problem is? You think they don't want to work with you? Like, is there some kind of personal issue? Like, is there a conflict? And eventually it got to the point where he was able to express to her that he just thinks from a racial standpoint that a lot of his coworkers are white. They were not maybe interested in showing interracial relationships in those movies in Cuba at the time.
What year was this? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's actually a really good question.
Edit that out.
Yeah, so she in 1961 she started as an apprentice.
So in 1961 she was a young black woman in a male-dominated field, white-dominated field of cinematography and directing movies.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she was awesome. So she served as an assistant director to Jorge Fraga, Tomás Gutiérrez Alea, and Agnes Varda, and she became the first female director in Cuba. She married a fellow director, Hector Veltia, and they had a daughter. Her name was Idia in 1967. On the set of Y Tenemos Sabor, which is one of her movies, she met Germanial Hernandez. They met, they started working together. She was the director and he was the sound tech. They started an affair. And actually, she later married him and had 2 children with him. And I just love the story as he's reflecting on their relationship. It's really cute how he was just taken aback by her forwardness as a woman and how she owned her own body and was just kind of like, we're starting this relationship. This is what we're going to do. And he was
Okay.
like, wow. Because it was like, you know, it was the 1960s and it wasn't expected for a woman to behave that way and to own her sexuality. Yeah, it was really interesting watching him talk about her. It was like he was talking about a unicorn. And you could tell still to date that he looks to her that way. Like she was just so amazing and her presence was so amazing.
I mean, I don't think that's significant to that. I mean, definitely significant to that time, but like I think it still holds up today where, I mean, women are not expected to take the lead, especially in pursuing a man or a partner and taking ownership of their sexuality and their bodies in that way.
Yeah.
I know that's the movement in terms of like new wave feminism, and we were talking about like owning your body and your sexuality and not slut shaming women for being sexually active. I think those are things that, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are still things that women go through today, right? You know, you gotta...
Arguably, a lot of this stuff is heightened for Black women and women of color. So it certainly is really inspiring to see that she owned her body that way. And it was especially at that time.
Yeah, I mean, made an everlasting impression on her second husband.
Yeah. And you'll even see like throughout the film, and I'll give you guys all details on the names of the film and everything. You'll even see that her kids had inherited her sort of gift of that confidence and that drive. So at ICAIC, she was the assistant director on several films, including Agnes Varda's Salut les Cubains, which is she.
Say that one more time.
Salut les Cubains. um, I'm assuming that's how it's said in French. But
That's French.
this French woman was like there in Cuba making these movies, and she's interviewed in the documentary as well. Very good stuff.
I mean, we forget that Cuba wasn't closed off to the rest of the world, just the United States.
United States, yeah. So Tomás Gutiérrez Alea's Cumbite as well. And though a good friend and mentor to Gomez, Titon later admitted that Sarita was a disaster as an assistant director and a minor defect she made up for with her uncanny originality, passion, and strength of character, which I thought was a beautiful way to describe her. And in the documentary, you also see her relationships with her colleagues and just how, confident she was. And I could only know how to describe this in Dominican because I'm Dominican. So, like, era muy confianzúa, because I don't know how to say, what's a way to say that in English?
Oh, I don't have no idea.
It's like comfortable.
But it's just like, way too comfortable and way too confident.
Yeah, just like, hey, what's
real
going on?
quick.
Yeah, so there was like...
It's like, the best way I could describe it is that person that walks into your house and like goes straight into your fridge and it's the first time that they're there.
Oh yeah, it's so funny that you're saying that because this is like something she did. So one of her colleagues was not feeling well or was like whatever, not at work, and she just like shows up at his house. His wife answers the door. She's like, okay, yeah. She just like walks up into his room, like starts pulling clothes out of the closet and like telling him to get dressed, like underwear and everything. And she's like, okay, I'll wait for you downstairs. Hurry up. So I was like, oh my God, this is the women I know. And I can't believe this is the first time I'm hearing of her, just because of that one, the way that the documentary shared her story was really beautiful, but also because she is so much what a Caribbean woman looks like to me, a Black Caribbean woman looks like to me. So I was just really thrilled to hear those like little anecdotal moments that she had with her colleagues. She also directed several short documentaries that brought a highly critical perspective toward the Cuban Revolutionary Society, in particular the position of women and Afro-Cubans. With her debut film Iré a Santiago, means that I shall go to Santiago, she became the first female film director in Cuba. This black and white film is a loving portrait of Santiago de Cuba and its people. It provides a view of Cuba as a picturesque country, the product of an earthy mix of black and criollo cultures. The film uses historical images which portray the end of the 18th century when Haitian slave owners fled with their slaves to Cuba after the Haitian Revolution. What happened?
I'm just, they accepted the slave owners in Cuba.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode. But and I didn't want to focus too much on, like the concept of slavery for this month, because I find that sometimes when people go into Black History Month, or traditionally when Black History Month has been discussed, you see images of Martin Luther King or
usually somebody in the struggle. I mean,
right.
That is the Black experience, but that's not all the Black experience is.
Right. So that's why I wanted to show someone who was just a person thriving, living your life, being Black girl magic and inspiring us all. And I'm so glad I found Sarita. So there was also a movie that she directed called Isla del Tesoro, which traces the history of the Isle of Youth, formerly called Pinos Island or Treasure Island, from the discovery of the island by Columbus to 1969. The relationship between the old and the new world, the humankind and history, and the meaning of human acts in a revolutionary era are considered in a brief story of Cuba. The aggressiveness of the film comes not only from the experiential use of sound, but from an anti-Americanism born of a time in which Cuban film directors took an active part in politics. I thought that was an interesting thing to share, because there's a lot to be said about film. Like, we kind of joke around and watch whatever we watch, and we talk about like Game of Thrones or whatever. But when a film really has something to say about society or something to say about the time when it's being made, it can be looked at as a historical document. And I think a lot of the work that she did can be seen that way, which, by the way, can be found on YouTube. And I'll make sure that we have links to everything in show notes. Yeah. The documentary cannot be found on YouTube, but it can be found on Quelly TV, where I found it. So we'll make sure we also have a link to that. You can rent it for 24 hours, or you can buy a Quelly package as well. After completing several shorts, she set about making her first feature and docufiction masterpiece, De Cierta Manera. Unfortunately, she did pass away. Her tragic death was at the age of 31 in 1974, and it was a result of an asthma attack. So she was unable to...
What year was it? 1974?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
So she was unfortunately not able to complete that film, but Titon, along with Julio Garcia Espinosa, they were able to finish the film according to her original vision and brought Cuba one of its unequivocal masterpieces of film art. Luckily for us, it is on YouTube, and it's one of those YouTube videos you might find that'll be like in 7 pieces, so we can watch it. But just know that it's a little bit. You have to watch all 7 pieces separate. So yeah, so be sure to check it out and see why this post-revolutionary Cuban cinema is often considered among the world's most innovative and socially committed cinematic movements of all time. And this, again, I find interesting that as Americans, we had no idea that this was going on because of the embargo and all the issues politically between the U.S. and Cuba. But this seems like a really important part of history that we should be educated on. So what's interesting is that it is this last movie, De Cierta Manera, translated for the U.S. audiences as One Way or Another, which doesn't really kind of cover the real meaning behind De Cierta Manera. The way they described it in the documentary, I loved it. They were just very much like to experience the world or their world as an Afro-Cuban, and where people say, how are you doing today? He's like, oh, yeah, de cierta manera, So it's just a very good explanation of like the social conditions at the time. So even the name in and of itself was a really good representation of what you were going to watch. So it has been hailed as the first movie to truly explore conflicting threads of racial and gender identity within a revolutionary context. But one of the things that was really, really interesting about this film, we're going to spend some time talking about the film really quick because it really does highlight some really important things about society at the time. So one of the things that happens in the documentary that they kind of refer to poor people or Black people in Cuba as marginalized. Mm-hmm. So I'm unclear as to whether you're marginalized if you're Black and poor. But Sarita herself was not considered marginalized because she was of middle class. So when they talk about marginalized culture, they're talking about definitely poor people. And I think that there's then the socioeconomic piece, but also the racial piece mm-hmm. for Afro-Cubans, and how there sort of were promises that were not kept under the government for equality or equity that are explored in her work. And so
let's say I wonder how do we know how the Castro regime kind of took to these films and any sort of critique on his regime, because his revolution was one about equity, and really the whole reason his revolution was a success is due to the Black people on the island. He was able to gather them and really say yeah, this is your revolution, I'm just leading it. So I'm curious about any sort of known thoughts that the regime had against any sort of critique in this way.
there was not a good response,
Okay.
as you may have guessed, because that ended up turning into a dictatorship, as we all know, and those don't go well. So I'll get to that in just a second.
Cool.
But but you always go in the right direction when we're having these conversations. One of the things that they kind of discuss in the movies are Santeria, and then a group called the Abacua, which I had not heard about, surprisingly. And they are basically referred to as an Afro-Cuban version of the Freemasonry. And if you see them, because if you Google some pictures of them, and we'll try to have some stuff up also for you guys, but they, I don't know if anyone saw the movie Skulls, but it would be like
that cinematic masterpiece, Skulls, with Joshua Jackson and the late actor, he died.
I don't remember.
White man from Fast and Furious.
Oh yeah. Paul
Walker.
Thank you. May he rest in peace.
But yeah, that cinematic masterpiece, Skulls.
Yes, it was a lot like that, but with like, African influence. So you see the way that they're dressed up, and like the robes that they have on, and the way that their faces are covered, and they have like these hoods on. Made like from straw and stuff.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Because when you say somebody's wearing a hood, I'm like, oh, KKK.
But it's like the shape of it is very KKK.
Oh, okay.
So it's very interesting. It really did bring me back to those images of those other kind of like, obviously on a way different side of the spectrum, but it just reminded me of that kind of look, and the way that they're referred to is very much like this is a secret society, and it's very not inclusive of other people, and it's not, you're just not in because you're Afro-Cuban. Like you have to, kind of be a part of this. So that's kind of gone over, and they talk about how one thing that comes up, they're having this discussion about like marginalized culture and how it's survived because it's marginalized, which I think is a very interesting take on looking at like how a lot of our culture, wherever, and I'm talking about Latin Americans that are of mixed race, and how a lot of us have survived. We're still here, right? So how being marginalized sort of creates like the need for holding on to these things and making sure that those things, those cultural sort of artifacts and traditions and whatever, that those are continued to be passed down. So, there's a protective culture, essentially, that they discuss a little bit. And then they kind of go into like, if it was mainstream, then it probably wouldn't exist the way that it does, which I think there's a lot of truth to that. As colonized people, as former enslaved people, you have to hide these things. You have to make sure that there's like code and secrecy behind it so that those things can be preserved. And there wasn't space for those things to be mainstream and to be held the way that they should be, or ways that could be preserved the way that they should be. In fact, there was clear plans and clear strategies to erase those things and erase a lot of us. So I thought that was like just a conversation that was had during the documentary that I thought was important to note here when we talk about her work, because these are the kinds of things that she was trying to bring to light, that it throughout all these struggles and throughout all this the consequences of colonization and the transatlantic slave trade. So in 2004, a Swiss filmmaker called Alessandro Muller directed the documentary film that I used as sort of the baseline for this conversation. Sarita Gomez, an Afro-Cuban filmmaker. And it was supported both by the ICAIC and Agnes Varda. For me, watching the film, that really kind of struck me, I'll say. There were so many things about being Caribbean Latino that were like coming up for me. One thing you're gonna maybe laugh about is they did a scene where the family was getting together for some purpose, and it was I believe it was her son's birthday, And there's actually some beautiful moment that her son talks about because her giving birth to him, she died when he was 2. There was a lot of talk about how she probably wasn't healthy enough to have him, and she did, and then he feels like a lot of guilt about her death, even though it was 2 years later. It just deteriorated her body the way that it did. Obviously, there's no way for us to know that for sure. I just feel terrible that he had that experience, and that, again, I'm just like coming from the perspective of a person who was like brought up with this Caribbean kind of culture. Yeah, people do say stuff like that and just like in your face and don't really think about how you feel about it. And yeah, she was brilliant and absolutely huge to the culture and for Afro-Cubans, but also I think for all Latin America. And it's unfortunate that, you know, that she was lost. And I think that while we should mourn her, I think locally the community, unfortunately, has also communicated some things to him that are really, that really sort of bring up the trauma for him in a completely different way. But again, because he's so strong, like she is, he can talk about that and be vulnerable about that and continue to push forward with his life, which is really amazing. So again, some great things. They're celebrating his birthday, and there's a birthday cake that looks like a regular birthday cake in Latin America, but then they have a candlestick in the cake. And when I say a candlestick, I'm not saying like a birthday
actual, like,
candle,
long,
like
yes,
a
candlestick.
long can, like
Yeah.
like Jack be nimble,
Yeah.
Jack be quick, Jack jump over the candlestick that's in the cake.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And like, I don't even know how many times my mom has done that. Like, it's actually just like a norm. Like, it's the best thing about being from where I am. Do I always have birthday candles in the house now because of these many experiences I have with putting a full candlestick in a cake? Yes, of course I have birthday candles in the house at all times. Do I still honor and cherish moments of my childhood where there were massive candlesticks inside of cakes? Yes, and this movie brought that up for me, and I'm just so grateful. And there was just moments where they're just driving through smaller neighborhoods, campo adjacent neighborhoods, and asking for directions, and like kind of like they were like looking for people to interview, so they would like roll up, and you know, there's directions out there, you know, so they're like, oh no, you're on the wrong street, you need to go this way. So it's just like people out on the street just giving directions. When you get over to the Blue House, you make a left. That's how you give directions in the Caribbean, and I love it.
I mean, I think that, well, I don't know if it's all Latin America, but like in Nicaragua, there are no street addresses. Shit, you're not. There are no street addresses. It's either west of the rotunda or east of the rotunda that you're going, and from there, you know, you make a certain level of like directions. It's never like a street address. It's just not. I remember filling out the, you know, when you go to the immigration little paper, like says where you're going to be staying. I was like, okay, cool. What's the address to where we're staying? And my family hands me these directions. I'm like, these are directions, guys.
This is not an address. We have to fill this thing out.
Yeah, but apparently that is the thing. It's not. There's just no directions. There's no like street numbers. You're not going to find. I don't know how anybody gets anywhere, but I think that's something that we brought over too into. I think I say we Latinos from Latin America. You give directions. You're like, yeah. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna keep driving until you see Pepo on the corner. Mm-hmm. When you see Pepo on the corner, you're gonna make a right. Mm-hmm. And if you see the McDonald's, you went too far.
Yeah, no, that's how we modernized it or Americanized it, where we're just like, now where it's like the McDonald's or the bodega. Yeah. I love it. I love who we are. In line with what you were saying before, she critiqued the Cuban Revolutionary Society for failing its promises of equality to Afro-Cubans. Mm-hmm. As a consequence, much of her work was sanctioned and restricted by the Cuban government. Huh. Yeah. It was not made publicly available until 2007, when they began to be digitized. So I guess like this is like the weird thing about it.
It was smuggled out, I'm assuming, in the
Yeah, that's it's like somebody's just turning these into
At that-
DVDs now, and then they're like, oh, you know what? We should show these. Like, what happened there?
Well, I'm surprised that they even at that point they were like, maybe it was just out at so available that they were just like, yeah, whatever, just release it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as a revolutionary filmmaker, Sara Gomez focused not only on wider social inequities that Afro-Cubans were subjected to, but specifically the socioeconomic annihilation of Black women in the post-revolutionary Cuba. Isn't she awesome?
I think Sarah was taking time to process her whole story. One, like, I love hearing about badass women, especially when Caribbean women have a certain particular level or brand of badassness, where it's very similar to like when we were talking about Lolita LeBron, where it's just very much take charge. It's like badass. We're gonna go do this. I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do. I'm leading this in what was very much a man's world. You have to have a certain level of audacity.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a certain level of confidence in yourself, which really doesn't give many people the opportunity to question you or to at least stop you, right? You're like, okay, I guess she's doing this.
Yeah.
So I've never heard of her. I think that's great, and I'm so happy that we're talking about her, because I think it's extremely important to talk about these pioneering women, a Black woman at that, in the film industry, who didn't get her due because of whatever. Obviously, she died way too early, but at the same time being silenced by the government, which had promised her and her fellow Afro-Cubans a certain level of equity or progress that didn't fully come to fruition.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that people are at least being exposed a little bit to her. I'm definitely gonna do a little more research on her.
I was trying to get you to watch the documentary with me, and then I was like, well, I don't want to spoil what I'm gonna share with you, so I'm probably just gonna rent it again. So that you could see it, because I would love for you to experience her the way that I did, and I know you're gonna have a ton of respect for her because you love film like that. So it'll be a really great experience for you, and watching her films, because a lot of them are short films, and De Cierta Manera is the longest one, and that one's not super long. It's not super long. My sources for this was the documentary film, which was the 2004 Sarita Gomez, an Afro-Cuban filmmaker. I also looked up her work via a article by Remezcla, and Hip Latina was where I found her, and Face to Face Africa is where I got a lot of good information about her as well. And I will be making sure that all of this information is referenced in the episode notes. And that's all, folks. This is the story of Sarita Gomez. Have a wonderful Black History Month. I hope you guys do your own research on some stuff. And if not, we'll be posting it. So check out our social media as well.
I'm Fredo B.
I'm Minerva Angeles.
Thanks for listening.